Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second virtual PNR Planning Committee meeting. Before we move to the agenda, as I did last time, I will run through several points regarding virtual committee procedures. Today's meeting is being held under the virtual meeting regulations using Microsoft Teams.
Councillor Anne Harley
is now joining.
All committee decisions today will have the same standing and will be as valid as decisions made at a standard meeting held in the town hall. We are streaming today's planning meeting live on the internet, and a recorded version will be on the council's website within 48 hours. Members of the public who have submitted written statements under agenda item 1, I can confirm your statements will be read out by officers for the benefit of everyone watching today's meeting. The committee membership has been agreed by all political groups and a chief executive, and consists of 13 members adjusted to accord with political balance. Only today's virtual committee members may make decisions on each agenda item. Members, please ensure your audio is muted when you are not speaking. And if you wish to speak, indicate this by using the chat function. Please do not use hand signals. I will invite members to speak by way of a queue system. If any member wishes to leave or return to the meeting at any point, please ensure the chairman is aware of this via the chat function. This is paramount in respect of any disclosable pecuniary interests, whereby you are not permitted to take part in the agenda item by law. You should immediately leave the meeting before any debate on an item where you have a pecuniary interest. A Democratic Services Officer will confirm when you have left the meeting or return to the meeting following determination of the agenda item. Voting procedure. When proposing a motion, please indicate via the chat function and wait until I invite you to speak. State clearly what you are moving, for example, the recommendation in the report. This is important in regard to the public following the planning process. If you are seconding the motion, again, indicate via the chat function and wait until I invite you to speak. Voting on applications will be by roll call. The legal officer will call each councillor in turn in alphabetical order. The vote will be taken on the basis that you have heard the full debate on the application. Please state clearly if your vote is for the motion or against the motion, or you wish to abstain. This will ensure that the vote is correctly recorded. Voting on matters of procedure, such as confirmation of the minutes, will be done in reverse order and en bloc. I will ask members if they wish to vote against the motion using the chat function, Then for any members wishing to abstain via the chat function, then all remaining voting members will be taken en bloc as voting for the motion. Please make sure all mobiles are switched off. And before we move to the agenda, are there any questions?
Just to say, Ruth Jacobs, I don't have a chat function.
Yes.
So it's very difficult.
Okay.
Councillor Anne Harley here, and neither do I.
Okay. Hazel, via chats, anybody wishing to speak?
No, Chairman, nobody's indicated via chat they wish to speak.
In which case, Michelle, please can you undertake the roll call for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. I will now read out the list of the reduced members of PR. Could you confirm you are able to present and able to hear? And that'll be Councillor Cherry.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Councillor Cole.
Present.
Councillor Crew.
Hear me.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
Present.
Councillor Gibbons.
Yes,
Councillor
present.
Councillor Harley.
Yes.
Councillor Hogg.
Present.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Present.
Councillor McQuillan.
Present.
Councillor Payne.
Yes, present.
Councillor Porter.
Present.
Councillor Solomon.
Present.
Councillor Westwood.
Here.
Thank you. And additionally, we have additional members. Councillor Bird. Councillor Bird.
Present.
Councillor Havison. Will be speaking as warden. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Jacobs.
Yes, present.
Okay. And the officers in attendance are Head of Planning, Richard Kent, Planning Service Managers, Roger Wilmot and Simon Exley, Lead Transport Planner, James Wigmore, Solicitor Sue Buck, and Democratic and Electoral Services Officers, Michelle Chesterman and Hazel Brinton. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, moving on to agenda item 1, addresses by members of the public to be read out by officers, and we have 4 in total. The first address relates to agenda item 6, up to 54 dwellings at Banwell. Mr. Simon Tannehill supports the proposal, and his address will be read out by Hazel Brinton.
Thank you for the opportunity to make this statement in support of the proposals at Wolvers Hill Road, Banwell. My name is Simon Tannehill and I'm the Land and Planning Director at Strongbox Homes. We are an award-winning private housing developer based in Taunton that work across the southwest to deliver high-quality housing. We do not roll out one-size-fits-all developments or are proud of what we achieve. We are currently building and selling on a number of developments in North Somerset, and these include 38 homes at Congsbury, 118 homes at Sandford and 49 houses and apartments at Westwick. These developments offer a range of family homes, including affordable properties, and our sites are designed to be sympathetic to their surroundings, with homes displaying character and individuality. We hope the committee's site visit and materials were helpful in gaining an understanding of the site since the previous deferral. I do not intend to reiterate my previous statement in full, but to emphasise the key elements. We have worked with officers and the local community on this project for over 2 years, including entering into formal pre-application discussion with the council, as well as public consultation. We have significantly amended the development since its submission, working to find solutions, and in doing so have reduced the amount of development we are seeking on this site from 63 to 54 homes. We are delighted the application is before you today with a recommendation for approval. I note that the chief concerns of the local community and from the previous members' debate understandably focus on the traffic situation in the centre of Banwell. I can assure you that this has been explored in great detail with your highway officers. As set out by your officers, an appeal decision for 150 dwellings, while dismissed, established that such a scope of development would not warrant refusal on transport grounds. We welcome the officer's conclusion that the scheme will not have a material impact upon the village centre's traffic situation. While we appreciate that such development evokes strong concern from local communities, we have worked hard to ensure that the impacts of development are comprehensively addressed, clearly evidenced through the various technical responses that have been received, demonstrating that there are no outstanding concerns and concluding that the proposals are acceptable. We fully support the officer recommendation and respectfully request that the development be granted planning permission. End of statement, Chairman.
Thank you. The next address relates to agenda item 7. Tracy Thomas, on behalf of the Nailsea Action Group, is against the proposal, and her address will be read out by Michelle Chesterman.
Thank you, Chairman. Since planning permission was first granted in December 2017 for the Engine Lane development, much has changed at every level. Locally, planning permission has recently been granted for 450 houses to be built on Youngwood Lane, adjacent to Engine Lane. This will more than satisfy one of the main reasons given in 2017 for the development, that houses in Nailsea are needed now. With 171 on Engine Lane, this totals to 621 new dwellings in a relatively small area serviced by lanes and roads, unaltered for 50 years and with no plans for infrastructure improvement. What has not been considered is the cumulative impact of the significant additional traffic movement associated with 621 new houses, not a piecemeal approach. Never more so than now, the importance of open space, preferably green, to physical and mental health is much better understood. What is now available in the southwest corner of Nailsea will be built over by developments, locking the current residents into an urban environment with poor access to countryside beyond. To counter this by saying that this is always what has happened as populations grow is feeble. The mistakes of the past do not need to be repeated for the future. More imaginative ways need to be found to meet the need for housing. There are, for example, brownfield sites in the area, empty shops and office accommodation, and these unfortunately are likely to increase in the aftermath of the pandemic. Furthermore, can the Council's recent climate emergency declaration be taken seriously when there are no plans to increase jobs in Nailsea, so that there will be increased commuting with resulting increases in global warming? How does the declaration fit with approving the disappearance of a large chunk of good agricultural quality open green space that is already outside the settlement boundary and quite some distance from most of the town's main amenities? There are several issues to be resolved before this site can be developed. It cannot be developed unless the National Grid has completed its cable undergrounding works, the replacement sports pitches are fully functional, a mains water supply is successfully diverted, and the concerns raised by the Council's own flood risk management team are resolved. There are more, but time does not permit any further elucidation of these. So please refuse this application and leave this land as it is, ready for community use, which was, as most of it was intended to be anyway, thereby serving the needs of the whole community of Nailsea in so many different ways and so much better than 171 dwellings would. This would also accord with the majority view of the responses to the planning application, some 96% against, including local MP Dr. Liam Fox, to only 4% in favour. And that's the end of the statement, Chair.
Thank you very much. On the same application, Mr. Ken Cosner for Barrett Homes supports the application, and his address will be read out by Hazel Brinton.
This statement has been prepared by Lichfield, planning consultants on behalf of the applicant Barratt Homes. As you are aware, the proposal before you benefits from a resolution to grant reached in December 2017. However, that scheme proved undeliverable owing to the constraints presented by the Hinkley Point C connection project. Over the last 2.5 years, the applicant has continued dialogue and negotiations with National Grid. Whilst the outcome has been a reduction of 12 dwellings than previously considered, it remains consistent with the policies of the adopted core strategy and the key development principles for this specific site, which is an allocation of the site's allocations development plan document. As you are aware, the majority of the application site is owned by Nailsea Town Council, which has meant that the approach to developing the proposals have been heavily guided by the community through workshops and exhibitions. Likewise, our team has worked collaboratively with council officers and statutory consultees to refine the proposals and consider issues raised by the various representatives. The application site comprises a fundamental component of the council strategy to deliver a 5-year housing land supply. The application site is sustainably located in relation to existing services and facilities. This is evidenced through the allocation of the site. The revised proposal before you makes the development of 171 homes, of which 30% would be affordable. That is 51 units. 80% of the homes are either 1, 2, 3 beds, seeking to cater primarily for young families and those wishing to downsize. In collaboration with the Town Council, the desire to address affordability concerns in Nailsea has been one of the key drivers behind the proposal, and this scheme meets the Town Council's housing mix policy. As confirmed in your officer's report, there are no technical constraints that would prevent the development of the site. Some further work is required in respect of the precise wording of appropriate conditions, but these issues are not fundamental and can be progressed at a delegated level. Your officers consider that the development would be in keeping with the character of the surrounding area, and effects on the wider landscape are considered limited. The traffic and transportation implications of the proposed development have been assessed thoroughly and are considered by your officers to be acceptable, subject to appropriate mitigation. Likewise, ecological effects have been considered thoroughly, and in addition to extensive on-site and off-site mitigation, the applicant will be funding a strategic technical study to inform the council's approach for future growth. Whilst the existing junior playing pitches will be lost, alternative replacement pitches of better quality and quantity in accordance with Sport England standards will be delivered before any loss takes place. In addition, a contribution of £400,000 will be made to the rugby club to facilitate new facilities in addition to the appropriate SIL tariff for improvements to wider sporting facilities elsewhere in Nailsea. We hope you can agree that this is a highly positive proposal to successfully deliver essential new housing for Nailsea. Through collaboration with multiple stakeholders, the applicant and their consultant team have worked hard to agree a scheme that proposes the appropriate housing stock whilst ensuring a high quality design. Thank you for your time. End of statement, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Our last address
Chairman,
goes to...
Chairman, if I may, just before we move on to the next speaker, can I just point out to anybody that's phoned in that in the absence of a mute button, you can be heard over the microphone. So if you're on the phone, please be very careful to keep away from the phone because we can pick up background noise. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. Our last address relates to agenda item 8, Cinderford Cottage, Ropers Lane, Rington. Ms. Helen Gwinnett supports the proposal, and her address will be read out by Michelle Chesterman.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Helen Gwinnett and I am the applicant. I have owned Cinderford Cottage for over 30 years. The rationale for this project was to sensitively extend my cottage to make it more suitable for occupation in later life. The current stairs are extremely steep at 48 degrees and awkward due to the half landing and restricted head height. Ground floor living accommodation is on 2 levels, and the laundry and utility room are in a separate 1950s outbuilding accessed by 2 steep steps and across in a yard. The benefits for me are mainly from an accessibility perspective in that it simplifies and opens up the ground floor to provide better circulation space, provides a utility room within the cottage, provides a wider and shallower pitch staircase with full head height above, provides an ensuite bathroom in the main bedroom, and very importantly, provides level first floor accommodation. The proposed improvements will still allow the retention of a good-sized cottage garden and off-street parking for 2 cars. This scheme has evolved from the original architect design with input from the neighbours, the planning officer and the conservation officer. As a consequence, the scheme fully complies with North Somerset Council's residential design guide. We do not believe that it creates any overlooking issues, nor does it have an overbearing impact on the adjacent properties. To develop this scheme, the architect has worked tirelessly with the local authority. I believe that a sensitive scheme has been developed, which not only respects the existing property with a subservient extension, but also will make the property inclusive for myself and future occupiers. In summary, the proposal fully complies with planning policy, is supported by the planning officer, the conservation officer and Rington Parish Council, who have all recommended approval. On this basis, it is hoped that the application can be supported by this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, apologies. Michelle.
No apologies received, Chairman.
Item 3, declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests.
None received by chat, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Item 4, minutes of 20th of May. Any comments before the vote is taken?
No request to speak, Chairman, via chat.
Okay. Are there any members voting against the motion via chats?
None received, Chairman.
Are there any members wishing to abstain via chats?
None received, Chairman.
In which case, en bloc, all remaining members support the motion and that is carried. Thank you. Item 5, matters referred by Council, the Exec and other committees. There are none. Item 6, application 18/P/4735/OUT, outline planning application for up to 54 dwellings off Wolvershire Road, north of Wolvershire Park, Banwell. Section 1 application deferred for 1 site inspection. Roger Wilmot.
Chairman, it would appear that we've lost Roger for a second. We'll just hold on a moment.
Okay.
Chairman, I'm afraid we're struggling to establish contact with him. Could I suggest that maybe we move to the application for Rington, so that whilst we then come back to this application?
Okay, so moving on to application 8 at Cinderford Cottage, Rivers Lane, Rington, deferred for a site inspection. Simon Exley.
Thank you, Chairman. We'll run through the slides. I know some members have been to visit the site, so hopefully for those who haven't seen the site, the slides will show what's proposed. Can we start the slides, please? Thank you. If members look at the plan, the Cinderford Cottage is in the middle of the plan. It's behind a property called Greystones. It's just outlined in red, and Greystones fronts onto the road in front, the Grey Road, which is Roper's Lane. Access to Cinderford Cottage is to the left of Greystones. There's a parking on the frontage to Roper's Lane, and then access is by a path down the side to the cottage itself. We can have the next slide, please. This is the aerial photograph, which shows the red line of the application site, which shows parking alongside Roper's Lane, which is on the south side of the lane. Immediately below that is a new house called Bramley House, which was built in the former garden area of Cinderford Cottage. And then Cinderford Cottage again is south of Greystones, and you can just see the roof of that building. To the right-hand side of the red line is Swallow Barn, which is a residential cottage, and then there are other gardens in the area. Next slide, please. Again, that's an aerial view showing Roper's Lane. On the north side of the lane, just above the wording Roper's Lane, near the middle of the site, is a lodge, which is a Grade 2 listed building. If you look down in the centre of the picture, you can see the garden areas around the various houses in the area. Next slide, please. If members look at this, this shows the existing cottage. If you look at the bottom in the middle of the plans, it shows how Cinderford Cottage adjoins Greystones, which is to the north of it, towards the top of the drawing, and it has other properties around it. If we can have the next slide, please. This is a plan. If you look at the centre of the plan, the block plan, you can see we've coloured up where the two proposed extensions are. One of them is on the right-hand side of the cottage, which is the two-storey extension, and in the middle there is a porch. Cinderford Cottage faces down to the bottom, which is to the south. On the right-hand side of the cottage, where the two-storey extension goes, there's presently a building which is to be demolished. I'll just take you through some of the individual slides. If you look at the top left, that shows the rear of Cinderford Cottage and where the proposed extension is going. That will be a view that will be taken from the view from Roper's Lane to the north. The second one drawing on the top is showing the side elevation, which is from the east side, looking towards the side of the proposed new extension. Members just see that the top right corner of the extension has a hip roof. The third drawing is showing the front of Cinderford Cottage, showing the porch and the two-storey extension. If you note that the ridge height of the two-storey extension is below the ridge height of the cottage, and the fourth one on the right-hand side shows how the two-storey extension will come forward of the front of Cinderford Cottage itself by 2.2 metres. The two drawings that are on the left-hand side of the layout plans show the ground floor of the proposed extension, and then the bottom left shows the first floor of the proposed extension. From that bottom plan, you can see there is also a gap on the right-hand side of the extension that provides it's approximately 1 metre to a boundary wall, and then that is accessed down the side of the property. If we can go to the next slide, please. In assessing the impact on adjoining properties, planning officers use what we call the 45-degree rule, which is in the Residential Design Guide section 1, and this is a measurement taken from a ground floor window at 45 degrees to see if a new extension encroaches in the 45 degrees, then it is considered that it would have an unacceptable impact on be overbearing to the occupiers of that adjoining property. And the 45-degree rule is measured both vertically and horizontally. On the top top of the slide, the second drawing shows the dotted line, which has got a light red colour on it, shows that the proposed extension will not fall within the 45 degrees vertical line from the kitchen window at the rear of Greystones. And on the third slide, which shows that the side extension will not fall within the 45 degrees from the rear dining room window and lounge window of Swallow Barn. If you then look at the second floor plan that's on the left-hand side, the two lines that are marked, that one at the moment, which is just to the north, again is the horizontal line from the window, kitchen window of Greystones, and the one below that is the 45 degrees from Swallow Barn. Again, that's shown on the floor plan on the bottom left, and again those two measurements show that the proposed extension falls outside the 45 degrees, both horizontally and vertically. If we can have the next slide, please. The photograph shows where the proposed extension is going to be. It will be on the right-hand side of the cottage, where there's a rendered single-storey outbuilding, and just behind that there's a stone boundary wall, and the other side of the stone boundary wall is the single-storey element of Swallow Barn, and you can see the chimney that's rendered on that. Next slide, please. This is a closer view of the right-hand end of the cottage, which shows that the single-storey rendered outbuilding will be demolished, and that's where the two-storey extension will be built, and where the porch would be built, where there's the small porch over the front door. Next slide, please. This shows again the gap where the two-storey extension will be built in the space between the end of the cottage and the boundary wall. Next slide, please. That's a view looking over the boundary wall to the rear of Swallow Barn. Next slide, please. That looking to the west side, and it shows the new house, Bramley House, which was built a few years ago in the garden of Cinderford Cottage, and that's corner is where the access from the car parking is. Next slide, please. This is a view looking from Swallow Barn and the patio at the rear across to the gable of Cinderford Cottage, and the extension would come out 2 metres past the main front wall of the cottage. Next slide, please. This is the view that was taken from Greystones, looking south past the east end gable of Cinderford Cottage, and that's where the new extension, two-storey extension, would be seen. Again, this is a view taken from Roper's Lodge. The boundary wall at the bottom of the photograph is the boundary onto Roper's Lane, and then that shows Greystones on the right-hand side in rendered, and Cinderford Cottage, you can just see the end of the roof past that. Next slide, please. This is a view from Roper's Lane taken a little further back, which shows where the gable of Cinderford Cottage is. The two-storey extension would be to the left of that gable, and you can see the small chimney on Swallow Barn, which is rendered and at a lower height. Next slide, please. This is taken further up the lane opposite the site. You can see the render of Greystones in the foreground and Cinderford Cottage behind it. Next slide, please. Again, that shows Greystones and Cinderford Cottage across the road on Roper's Lane at the end, and it shows the corner on the right of Roper's Lodge. Next slide, please. I think we've been through all the slides now. I hope that explains it to members.
Thank you.
In terms of the committee report, we have updated the committee report from the last meeting, where there were certain concerns about the accuracy of the plans and the descriptions. Those have all been amended and updated for members. It appears that the main issue is the impact on the neighbours, which we've explained in the report, complies with the council's residential design guide, and the impact on the conservation area, which we've also explained that we consider it is acceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. And thanks very much for Simon for taking us through those slides. I just wanted to mention and reference the residents' comments that were read out at the start of committee. Those are a repeat of a letter that was sent to all councillors a week or so ago. There's nothing in those comments that are material in my view. And whilst I accept that the applicant wishes to make her later life more comfortable, I find it hard to accept why they haven't considered the later life of the residents that have to endure the aftermath of this extension on either side of them, and also residents of Rington that come down that ancient bridleway to find that the glimpse of the Mendips that we all get as we come to the bottom of the ancient bridle will be lost forever. I know that the neighbours throughout this process have been quite generous in their requests for some sort of compromise, and that hasn't been forthcoming, which is why we have to bring it back to P&R to debate. So I fundamentally disagree with the officers' recommendations to approve it. I'm hoping that most, if not all of you, will have had a chance, given that we deferred at the last meeting, to visit Brington and have a look for yourselves at the impact that the extension will have, both on the neighbours and on the community. I know that a few of you have been up there, and it would be good to hear from you in this debate as well, to see what your thoughts are about it. I think I went through in detail at the last P&R committee meeting. I showed a series of before and after images to try and convey what the impact is going to be. So I don't propose to go through in too much detail because I know we've got a very packed agenda today, but essentially the rear of the proposed extension to Cinderford Cottage will directly face and be seen from Ropers Lane. It will loom over the gardens of Greystones. It will destroy the immediate value for the residents of Greystones and seriously impact the value for residents at Swallow Barn. It is very, very imposing. For the residents at Swallow Barn, they are going to be looking at a 7-metre rendered wall, where at the moment they're looking at a nice, pretty period cottage and a lovely view. That will be obliterated by this development completely. And those of you that would have visited, I'm sure, will agree with me. The report advised that the gradient showed buildings at a lower level from Ropers Lane, but as you hopefully will have seen when you visited, Greystone and Cinderford Cottage are built on the same elevation. The effect of the gradient to the rear actually makes the impact on Swallow Barn worse than it would be if the gradient didn't exist. That's a key point. The report goes on to say that boundary features contribute to the pleasant rural aesthetic, but they also obscure views. But you will have seen that from Roper's Lodge, as you come down that ancient bridleway, the last maybe 25, 30 metres of that ancient bridleway, there are unspoilt views of the Mendips, and those views will be gone. And they've been there for hundreds of years. And during the coronavirus epidemic, I and hundreds of residents have been walking up and down that track every day. So I'm going to have to justify to my residents why a big stone curtain's been drawn across that view forever. The report argued the proposal would not unacceptably harm the characteristics and appearance of the existing dwelling or the character and appearance of the surroundings. But again, if you manage to visit Swallow Barn and see Greystones from that position, you'll know that that's just not the case. That they're going to be looking from their single-story, the single-story aspect of Swallow Barn. That's their main living accommodation. They will be walking out to a 7-metre by 7-metre expanse of render, as I've said. Also, just to remind members that there was an email that was from an officer, nobody on this call, but just concerning the application, in which the argument was made that we need to consider whether it's bad enough to refuse rather than good enough to approve. Now, I'm arguing that we can and should be doing a lot better than that. We should expect better. And especially because this is right in the heart of a conservation area. So this is slap bang in the middle of a conservation area. So, I would like to hear from other members that perhaps visited site. It'd be interesting to get your take on it. But I would like to move that we refuse this application. And I've got the reasons here. Would you like me to make the proposal now, or do we want to open it up for debate first, Chair?
Let's have debate first.
Okay.
Chairman, have I registered to speak? Councillor Anne Harley.
Okay.
Can I speak?
Go ahead.
Right,
yeah.
Right, Chairman. Unfortunately, I was not able to visit, but I know the area very well. And I think what Councillor Hogg has just said is absolutely vitally important, because most of us in the rural areas are desperately trying to protect our heritage And for something like this to happen in a conservation area, we will be opening up the floodgates. And we may as well, kiss goodbye to what we're trying to protect. We are so lucky to have these in our area, and it's up to us as councillors to ensure that we protect it. And I feel sorry for the lady who's put that plan forward, but at the end of the day, I would ask the question, if you want a bigger place, or if you want to do something, please do it tastefully. And if it isn't able to be done like that, then unfortunately, in my opinion, you should move, because it's vitally important we protect a conservation area. So I will support Councillor Hogg's recommendation for refusal.
So you're seconding his motion?
Yes, I will indeed.
Thank you. So any comments by chat?
Chairman, if I may, I think it's quite important that we do have the reasons for refusal if it's been moved and seconded.
Sure.
Okay. In which case, Councillor Hogg.
Would you like? Sure. Okay. So there's two principal reasons then. So number one, the proposed development, by virtue of its siting, height, scale, and its proximity to the site's boundaries, would have an adverse impact upon the living conditions of neighbouring residents at Swallow Barn and Greystones, by reason of an overbearing impact on Swallow Barn through a tunnelling effect on their rear living room and rear patio. The proposal is therefore contrary to policies DM32 and DM38 of the North Somerset Sites and Policies Plan Part 1 and the North Somerset Residential Design Guide, SPD Section 1, protecting living conditions of neighbours. And secondly, the proposed development will cause harm to the character of Rington Conservation Area, is out of keeping with the site and its surroundings, and results in harm to views in and out of the conservation area, and the design is unsympathetic to the character of the area, contrary to Part 2, Section 72 of the Planning, Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act 1990, and policies DM3, DM32 and DM38 of the North Somerset Sites and Policies Plan, policies CS5, CS12 and CS32 of the North Somerset Core Strategy. So that's the motion to refuse.
Thank you.
Chair.
Thank you.
Chairman, the officer Simon Exley would like to respond.
Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just respond on 2 points that Councillor Hogg's made. The first about the issue of a view. In planning terms, there is not a right to retain a view. However, in terms of the impact on a conservation area, we do have to consider whether the views into or out of a conservation area would be adversely affected by the proposed development. So that is only a consideration in terms of the impact on the conservation area. I'd also say the second point is about the impact on the conservation area. After what Councillor Hogg and Councillor Harley have just said, is that the Council's Conservation Officer has considered the plans, it's referred to in the report, and that the original scheme was not acceptable to the officers, including the Conservation Officer. The plans were amended and the Conservation Officer doesn't object to the plans and consider that it would adversely affect the conservation area. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members.
Hazel, any other members wishing to comment?
Yes, Chairman. We have Councillor Crockford-Hawley, followed by Councillor Havison, and then followed by Councillor Crew.
Could I, Chairman, sorry for breaking in, but I tried to raise my hand and my machine won't let me. I would like to speak. I would like to speak as well, please.
Okay. Councillor Crawford-Hawley.
Thank you, Chairman. I think a lot of this revolves around whether there is a loss of view to an individual or a loss of view which is more communal. And this being a conservation area, that strikes me as the only justifiable reason for either acceptance or refusal. And from the comments made about people using the nearby footpath, it does strike me that the loss will be communal rather than merely individual. and therefore I would be minded to support the reason for refusal. I don't know if the office, I mean, this runs contrary, of course, to the Conservation Officer's recommendation, but we're not simply here to underline what officers might have said. There may be a fundamental disagreement about the loss of the view. I wonder if there's any further observation on that point. Thank you.
Councillor Haverton.
Okay, I was lucky. Thank you for letting me speak, even though I'm not a voting member of this panel. I was lucky enough to be able to look around this development proposal, and I must admit I totally accept Councillor Hogg's reasoning, because I have seen the view from the public footpath, which is, as Councillor Crockford-Howley just explained, is the communal view, not a private view, which I know we haven't got a right to. So that would be lost, and that's a loss to the public into a conservation area. My second objection would be the effect on Swallow Barn, because Swallow Barn being a single-storey building, the 45 degrees in vertically and horizontally have a cumulative impact. I know we look at them separately, but for Swallow Barn, it's just within those 45-degree angles. And when I saw it, together with the fact that it's a blank rendered wall and not a lovely old traditional stone wall like all the other buildings at the moment, it would have an absolutely massive effect on their enjoyment of their back garden. It is totally out of character in terms of materials, because it's rendered and blank, whereas all the other buildings in that conservation area are natural stone. So I was quite shocked when I saw that impact that it would have. Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Councillor Crew.
Chairman, before Councillor Crew, Simon Exley would like to respond, please.
Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that the Conservation Officer did consider the impact on the setting and the views, but Councillor Crockford-Hawley is correct. The public use the lane, and the public's views are a consideration in terms of the conservation area. And if I could just come back on Councillor Haberson's comments, Swallow Barn is a rendered barn, and Greystones is also rendered. So there are rendered properties around in the conservation area. Thank you.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I very much along the lines of John Crockford-Hawley. I'm minded to go for refusal, but once again, officers are between a rock and a hard place. It's within design guide, Conservation Officer agrees, Parish Council agrees. I think the old problem is the design guide. Officers follow the rules that we lay down, and it's time we revisited the design guides. But I think, on balance, I'm inclined to go for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Westwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I did go out and look at this proposal. I think that the idea of the view in the landscape is an important one. If this is allowed, then there'll be a 7-metre high rendered curtain drawn across 2/3 of the view from just outside, and I mean literally, a foot outside the curtilage of the listed building, the small cottage at the back. It is a stunning, in my view, view of the Mendips. You get a lovely view as you come over the bank of that bridleway. You get a smashing view of the Mendips, and that will be gone. Unfortunate to say, but the applicant is taking away a public view and effectively only the occupant of the proposal, if it was to go ahead, would have that view in the future. So I shall be supporting the move for refusal.
Thank you. Hazel.
Yes, Chairman, Richard Kent would like to come back, followed by Councillor Gibbons, and then Councillor Hogg would like to speak again.
Richard.
Hello, Chairman. Thank you. I just wanted to come back to what Councillor Crew said about design guides. I know that's something the committee has spoken about previously, but in this particular instance, the guidance that we use for impact on neighbours in terms of 45-degree lines is a very common guide which is used by a lot of councils, and therefore I think if we were reviewing the design guide, that element of it is probably something that would be difficult to justify change to. Certainly there are other more aesthetic things which we could look at, but the angles themselves are not something that we would normally seek to change, because I say they are consistent with guidance elsewhere. Thank you.
Councillor Gibbons.
Oh, thank you. Actually, some of the points I was going to make have been made by Councillor Crew, but I just wanted some clarification. The one area where I was particularly sympathetic, I would say, to the applicant is the comment about making the property more accessible for future generations and for herself as she grows older, because we do need more accessible properties, especially in rural areas. But am I right in thinking that isn't actually a planning consideration in this instance? So I would be minded to go with the views of Councillor Hogg on this and support refusal.
Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to that, Councillor Gibbons, I totally agree with you. Absolutely every sympathy for the applicant wanting to make later life more comfortable for themselves. But, you know, do you do that at the expense of the later life of people who you're impacting? And, you know that at least one set of neighbours are, let's say, slightly more senior than I am, and you know they have every right to their amenity value and their comfortable retirement too.
Yeah.
And just on the point about communal views, I perhaps didn't emphasise this enough. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I suppose a lot of my sympathy rests with individual neighbours themselves, but actually as a resident of it, and I walk down that hill with my dog every day, and a big chunk of view of the Mendips accessed from that footpath shared by hundreds every day will be gone forever. And it's not just any old view, it's a view, an ancient view of an area of outstanding natural beauty, the Mendips, which we tell ourselves in all of our planning guidelines that is sacrosanct, and we must never spoil the views into an area of outstanding natural beauty. So yes, it's absolutely, I think the emphasis there is on the communal aspect of that view. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Hazel.
No further requests to speak, Chairman.
Simon, before I invite Councillor Hogg to sum up, any more comments?
Thank you, Chairman. No, the only thing is that Councillor Gibbons was quite right that the applicants need to make their home more comfortable for them is not a consideration. You're considering the proposed extensions. Thank you.
Any more comments from telephone members?
No, thank you.
Right. Councillor Hogg, can you sum up?
Well, yes. Well, thank you very much, Chair. I think I've said all I need to say. The two principal reasons there I've given. So, you know, I move that we refuse the application. As I say, I do appeal to the applicants here. I know this isn't really a material thing that I'm saying here, but I know that there is, you know, there's a compromise there to be reached with a single story extension. So, you know, I think everyone's lives would be made a lot more if you would just follow that line of thought. I'll leave that there, and I'll propose that we refuse this application for reasons I gave earlier.
Thank you very much. So we have a proposal to refuse the application. Sue Buck, can you please conduct the vote by roll call?
Thank you, Chairman. I will now take the vote from each councillor in alphabetical order, and for each vote taken, the councillor will be confirming that they have heard the whole of the debate, unless they state otherwise. The motion, as just stated, is for refusal for the reasons given by Councillor Hogg. When I take the vote, it will be for refusal, against will be against refusal, and obviously abstention. Councillor Cherry.
I support refusal.
Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Crewe.
For.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
For.
Councillor Gibbons.
For.
Councillor Harley.
For.
Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Abstain.
Councillor McQuillan.
For.
Councillor Payne.
Against.
Councillor Porter.
For.
Councillor Solomon.
For.
Councillor Westwood.
For.
Chairman, that's 11 for refusal, 1 against refusal and 1 abstention.
Thank you. That's clearly carried. Richard, are we back on track with Roger?
Chairman, yes, Roger is now back with us, so we'll revert back to
item 6.
Item 6, and we'll get the slides up for you.
Okay, application 18/P/4735/OUT at Banwell. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we'll run through the slides just very quickly to refresh everybody's minds about the application. It's an outline application with all matters reserved for subsequent approval, apart from the point of access. So this is the site location plan. You can see the site pretty much in the centre of the slide, coloured red. The road that passes through that red line, running from top left to bottom right, is Wolvers Hill Road. The maroon line running from left to right across the page is the A371 from Weston to Cheddar. That branches off, you'll see pretty much on the middle of the right-hand side of the slide. That is East Street on the way to Sandford, and the blue line, sort of about a third of the way along from the left, is the motorway. Thank you. So again, just an indication of the site in relation to the existing built-up area of the village. The purpley maroon area shown on the slide is the current Bellway development, which is under construction quite close to this particular site, which is outlined, or sorry, which is indicated by the red arrow. You'll see that that is immediately to the north of existing development at Nightclop Park and Wolvers Hill Park. As I say, you can see that in relation to the built-up area of Banwell. Okay, next slide, please. Just to reiterate the point that the plans are indicative layout plans at this particular point. We're not settling the exact layout, but this is a demonstration of how the various constraints and considerations can be taken into account in a layout. So just to enlarge upon that point, it shows to the right hand side of the site adjacent to Wolvers Hill Road quite a wide grass or area of green expanse, which helps assimilate the site into, or the development into, the existing sort of fairly leafy character of Wolvers Hill Road at that point. And that incorporates 2 attenuation ponds and various planting, and provides a route for bat flight through the site from the east of Wolvers Hill Road through and around the corridors. So to the north, the top of the site on this plan, there is a 10-metre margin shown for bat flight corridor. To the left-hand side, there is a 6-metre margin, and then along the southern boundary, a further 10-metre margin, again, all for ecological purposes. The 10-metre margin has the added benefit of obviously providing a separation distance between the proposed dwellings and existing largely single-storey dwellings along the southern or bottom boundary on this particular plan. Those are, as I say, in Wolvers Hill Road and Nightcott Park, Wolvers Hill Park and Nightcott Park. And the plan also illustrates the ability of the layout with this number to vary the position of any of the buildings away from that boundary. It shows also, running from top to bottom of the page in the middle of the site, the retention of the existing hedgerow across there, and the layout reflects also the presence of a fairly large water main that runs through the centre of the site, on which no significant building development can take place, and hence the reason why there is a certain amount of open space shown within the centre of the site. In terms of its access, as you'll see, it's coming from a single point of access from Wolvers Hill Road, and branches off into several small cul-de-sacs and private driveways. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Harley. Councillor Harley.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to recommend refusal. Do I have a seconder? Oh, hello?
Yes.
Hazel.
Yes.
Yeah, fine, thanks. Thank you. I thought I'd lost you for the moment. Chairman, although, as explained, that this is an outline planning application and reserved matters, which include design, etc., will be decided further along in the system, it is important that any concerns are raised at this stage because, as I understand it, they cannot be raised later. 129 people and the parish council have objected to this development for very valid reasons. Outside the settlement boundary, loss of village character, the cumulative effect of Banwell on Banwell and its infrastructure being unable to cope, public transport nowhere sufficient to suit the demands of the surrounding community, design cramped, and there are insufficient car parking spaces. I realise this could be addressed later on, but these are the real problems we're facing at the moment. It will erode the strategic gaps, green space between the historic centre of Banwell. These are just but a few of the concerns. Although it is understood that money is available to potentially build a bypass, but this is going to be relatively small. It's a first stage. A loop near the entrance to Wolvers Hill Road to Towerhead Road, which basically, however much it is needed, it will only take the traffic out of the centre of the village. It was intended to be a bigger part of a picture, as indicated in the JSP, but this is no longer on the table. And there is no doubt in my mind that once the bypass is built, Banwell's traffic problems are going to be passed on to Sanford and the surrounding villages. There has been much discussion and documentation about the movement of traffic, or may I say, lack of it, through Banwell. The villagers are absolutely astounded that in the wake of Bilby Grange, I think it's more appropriate to name would be Bible Grange, where villagers could go and pray to avoid the destruction of their village, feeding onto this point of gridlock with possibly more to come. The arguments raised that are proposed but as yet uncertain as to when a bypass might help the situation, or that because travellers already avoid the village and that more will simply do so, carries very little weight in the village, I'm afraid. They have been driven to express their thoughts, in which the newsagents has a poster with the parish council logo stating a community, not just a traffic jam. Are we just going to ignore these very real concerns? And I really will wish to ask the question, for goodness sake, what model are we using in North Somerset in deciding such developments with all these traffic issues are acceptable? and still coming out with the old adage, it will build a community. There's been much mirth about how the traffic flow was measured when for long periods of time nothing was moving due to the usual gridlock. And the idea that the development will enhance the community is not sustainable because no significant or concern is being given to that. It is purely because we are not reaching our housing numbers. I have consistently asked that we are kept properly informed about the numbers in order that we can give proper consideration to every development and not just nod it through to help our numbers. And pardon me if I'm being a defeatist, I do not think we are ever going to reach our numbers. As quoted in CS13, the previous administration, which when they submitted the numbers, the inspector, they felt it was manageable. The administration felt it was manageable. The inspector rejected it and raised the requirement to over 20,000. And this is what we and our communities are paying for now. CS14 states that service villages, which Banwell is, some flexibility should be given to small developments. This is not a small development. CS32 states that a small amount of development will be allowed for economic reasons. Nothing in this application, or the ones already agreed, have anything to do with economic reasons for the benefit of the community. There is basically no employment in Banwell, and whatever there was will have disappeared following the current situation. Anybody living in these houses will be out commuting or working from home, and any benefits economically will be felt by someone else. CS32 continues to say that any development would be allowed if it did not cause insignificant adverse impacts on services and infrastructure, and that the local infrastructure is sufficient to accommodate the demands of the development, and that it does not result in significant adverse cumulative impacts such as highways likely to arise from existing and proposed development within the wider area. All of these things it will do. With regards to the site itself, cross-sections shown in the plans have been consistently misleading. The gardens in Wilvers Hill Park are so steep that they have multiple retaining walls in order to gain some level areas, but this is not evident in the plans. Well, I'll carry on, Chairman. The plans, CC in landscape and visual impact assessment, 3 to 4 of 31/10/18, from Wolvers Hill Road, the rise in the land is so significant and so immediate that it adds a story to any building. So I come back to my previous comments. If this application were to be passed, it would be a flagrant breach of the 25 gap ceiling for developments adjacent to a service village, which is in place for a very good reason. For clarification, the land on the opposite side of Wolvers Hill Road for drainage, it is marked as green. I think on the plans, will that require the demolition of the old stone farm buildings? At this stage, we cannot take into account what a difference a Banwell bypass will make because we do not know. And it could take 3 or 4 years before it gets anywhere near completion. And in the meantime, we, Banwell and its surrounding villages, are being targeted with these inappropriate developments. Of course and we all understand we have to take a fair share, but it has to be appropriate. And the community are struggling to see that with the vast amount of new housing construction taking place in the immediate vicinity, we are contributing more than our fair share. NPPF clearly states development should only be prevented or refused on the highways ground if there would be an unacceptable impact on the road network would be severe, and that members, that says it all. I cannot see how the recommendation to approve this application does not have a severe impact on highways, on safety and the environment as required in Policy 32. I will quote what so many people have said to me. Local people frequently express the opinion that their views are not heard, and the local planning system is broken and out of touch with the reality of their lives. This development, if passed by councillors during this lockdown, would aid the sense of disenfranchisement. We are just a traffic jam and not a community, might be the new logo. Members, those sort of comments concern me, and we have to make sure that we rise above this and fight, however hard it may be, for our communities to see that their voices are being heard. They are not being intolerant. They are fighting for what is left of their communities where they have to live. And now those communities have responded in the current crisis and how important they are going to be in the future. Let us not break them in imposing inappropriate developments on them. And my reason, the main reason for my refusal is CS32. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Roger, before I invite members, do you want to comment further?
Thank you.
Richard Kent would like to come.
Okay.
Chairman, yes, sorry, before passing over to Roger and then James Wigmore from a transport point of view, I thought I would just want to make clear that whilst we understand the level of objection, we do need to be very clear that where the council has a housing supply shortfall, which it currently does, then what's called the tilted balance in the National Planning Policy Framework applies. And that means that we should be granting permission for housing unless the adverse impacts unless there are adverse impacts which significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the housing. So this is over 50 houses that would add to our housing shortfall, and that has to be balanced against the impacts of the site. And as you've seen in the committee report, we don't believe that there are any significant or overriding impacts that demonstrably outweigh the benefits. You need to bear in mind that CS32 does allow up to 25 houses or around 25 houses in any event, and be particularly mindful that the layout in this instance is illustrative. So the points that were made about parking and cramped design and so forth are not for this stage. The plans plans are only illustrative.
Yes.
So Chairman, if I may, I'd just like to ask James Wigmore to comment on the transport issues, and then hand over to Roger Woolmup to sweep up any further points, if that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah,
James.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, Richard. Thank you, Chair. Could we see the picture of the Banwell cordon that was included in the committee report? I think it's worth looking at this because it just explains about the knowledge that we have about the well-documented transport issues in Banwell. So the cordon shows where we've got the traffic data, and this goes back to 1985.
Ooh.
So you can see the red outline showing the areas where we're collecting the information from automated traffic counters. And whilst the situation in Banwell is well known, and as Councillor Harley said, people avoid it, when we look at the traffic growth in that area between 2001 and 2019, we're actually seeing a 1.3% reduction in traffic flow.
What?
No. Yes, this is what the data is telling us. This is what the automated traffic counter is telling us, compared to an 18% increase across North Somerset Council area. That doesn't include motorways. So that's one thing that we understand the data. We've got lots of data about Banwell. And what is understood, that as the traffic gets worse with increased development locally in Banwell, other travellers divert and avoid the situation. So it ends up with becoming a constant sort of issue, not really getting worse, just staying as bad as it's always been. And whilst that isn't acceptable, that's what we see in the data. As far as what the development is likely to add to the traffic situation, there's been growth models used. There have been robust assessments of impacts, and the particular section we're concerned about is the Narrows in Banwell, which is the sort of one-way, the system that operates like a shuttle, where drivers have to give way to each other. Now, during the peak hours, this development is predicted to add 3 extra cars through the Narrows. So what we cannot argue is that is that represents an acceptable impact on highway safety, or a severe impact. Yes, we know the situation is bad already, but we can't say that this development will make it severe. And those are the numbers that we're dealing with.
Chairman, can I come back on that? Can I just ask a question of the officer?
Yes, go on.
Yes. Well, I'm terribly sorry. Is it James?
Yes, that's right.
James.
Yeah.
I'm awfully sorry. You're quoting something to me that I don't even know whether I actually drive through Banwell at all, because it seems totally different to what I experience every day when I've been going through it. And the fact of the matter is, I can tell you what's happening. Any traffic going around this area, I'm telling you what's happening, is they get to the other side of Banwell, and now what's being created in the middle of Banwell is a crossroads. Because they go up the high street or down the high street, go straight across to go to Cinderford. Yes, a bypass will alter that, but any transport, any cars or any traffic on that road is getting worse. And how those statistics can show up that it doesn't show any worse effect, I really don't know. But that's not my main concern for objection. But I'm just raising that issue with you. That's why I asked the question of where you actually got these figures.
Okay, so can I just go back to the Banwell cordon? That obviously does show all of the roads going into Banwell and all of the junctions. And the figures have been recorded using automated traffic counters. So
how often are they used?
It is real data.
Councillor Harley.
Yeah, sorry.
So we've got data going back to 1985. We have got a gap between about 1992 and 1997, and then we've got continuous data which is still being collected.
Mm.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to mention about the Banwell bypass. Our Highways and Transport response to this application does not consider the expected improvements associated with the Banwell bypass. So it considers the present situation, whether or not a bypass is delivered.
Right. Roger, any further comments? No. So I've noted Councillor Harrison wishes to speak, but Hazel, are there any members in chat waiting to speak?
Yes, Councillor Harrison, as you say, followed by Councillor Payne, Councillor Porter, Councillor Hogg.
Councillor Payne.
Oh, me. Is it me?
Yes, Councillor Payne.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm struggling to agree with Councillor Harley on this one. She seems to be arguing against housing construction in general, or at least the argument she puts could be applied to any housing development that comes forward in the area. But all our communities need housing, particularly young people, young families who are struggling to get access to decent, affordable housing. But this location seems to me to be a pretty good one. Yes, it's outside the arbitrary settlement boundary, but it's right up against the existing housing, and it's close to the facilities in the village. And actually, this development is a fairly low density one compared to most of the ones we see. So yeah, I think this would make a good contribution to our housing numbers, and I'm going to be Well, I won't be supporting Councillor Harley's proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Porter.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt. Roger Wilmot would like to speak. He was trying to speak and was having some difficulty, I think, but he's ready to speak now.
Okay, Roger, come. All right. Roger Wilmot.
My apologies, Chairman. I think there was a slight time lag on my microphone unmuting. I was just going to comment that many of the understandable comments that Councillor Harley has made have been addressed within the report. I think the important point was made at the outset of the debate about where the tilted balance comes into play and the need to balance the harm and the conflict with policy against the sort of lack of overriding adverse impacts. In many of the contexts where we've considered village applications, there have been some crucial sort of issues such as drainage, neighbours, but more particularly landscape issues. And I think it's important to note on this one, as I think many members who would have visited the virtual site inspection would have seen, that the landscape impacts of this site are very, very limited indeed compared to most of the village ones that we've probably seen, and certainly where we've successfully defended. So a number of the issues in terms of neighbours can and will be addressed at a reserved matters stage if this is approved. You will see from the report that there is no objection either from Wessex Water or our own flood risk and drainage team, and from those points of view, say we believe that there are no overriding adverse impacts that outweigh the beneficial effects of adding to the housing supply.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
I think it was Councillor Porter before, Chairman.
Sorry. Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah, thank you. I listened to what Anne says about the highways. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of faith in any of our planning related to highways, because we look at a lot of issues where in practice we know there's problems, and the highways, from the interpreter of the regulation, says it's not. So I don't think that's a reasonable way of refusing this. What I do think is, and I agree when I heard Richard say about the tilted balance, I thought this was a very well written report. It actually showed all of the planning policies that are involved, and certainly the one regarding our service villages and 25 houses. I think we have to bear in mind that we're coming up with a new local plan, and we shouldn't drive horses through this all the time. And I look at the report and I think it comes down to the tilted balance. When I look on site, it doesn't look a bad site, I must admit, when you look at it, but it rises up quite a bit. I noticed they put some bungalows on the left-hand side because I think those will be overlooking some of the houses there quite a bit. But I think the only thing in the report I disagree with is how they came to the tilted balance that this wouldn't do harm. I think Banwell's had enough houses over the recent time. We've passed quite a lot of developments around here. I think we ought to be waiting till we do our local plan, seriously look at where the settlement boundaries are, and at that time it may be reasonable to put this in, but at the present time I think it's too early for it. I think the village is getting hit too hard with the number of applications at the moment. So I will support an refusal, but I accept it is a very on the edge one, because when you look at it, it could be there. As to say it's not very dense housing, I think when you look at it, the housing compared to the areas around Banwell there, other than the houses side by side, I think there's too many houses crammed in there personally. If they come with a reasonable number, and certainly if they come with 25, it would have complied with our policy, or very near to 20. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair. I have to agree with what's just been said there, actually. I mean, I just wanted to explore a little bit, a bit more about the traffic data that's been collected. Do we have any kind of, I was wondering if we had any sense of the split of that traffic, what kind of traffic movements those are, and how does that contrast with similar villages where we've got those automated traffic data? And I think I heard the officer saying that the bypass is is not been a consideration in this application, because what I'm concerned about is that it's referring to a bypass as some kind of mitigation, and that just reminds me of the airport and the promise of electric planes in a few years, and you just think, well, you know, build me an electric plane and then extend your airport, but perhaps that's just me. And I'd also like to just pick up on what Councillor Payne referred to as being the arbitrary settlement boundary. As a new councillor, could somebody please explain what's arbitrary about a settlement boundary? Thank you.
Councillor Haverson.
Thank you for letting me speak as the ward councillor. I must admit, I totally agree with Councillor Harley and Councillor Porter in their worries about this application. And let me start by saying I don't object to this development just because it's in my ward. I'm well aware of the pressures we're under to build more homes, especially affordable ones. And I'm sure the need for those as well as more modest ones will increase after this pandemic, not decrease. So I welcome the full quota of 30% affordable homes, also the proportion of smaller homes. I even approve of the relatively few parking spaces because we need to discourage car journeys in favour of cycling and public transport in the long run, as stated in the latest Department for Transport briefing by Grant Shapps. But there are several issues which worry me considerably about this application, and the first one very clearly is the traffic issue in Banwell. And I find the reasoning quite disingenuous to say that the traffic has actually gone down by 1.3%, which I totally accept. I'm sure that's true, but why? Why has it gone down? The reason is that we all use runs. I know, I do, because when I know there's a traffic jam in Banwell, I either make a 3-mile detour via Bleeden and Cross to get to Winscombe, or I go through the High Street, or I go around a single lane where there can be considerable traffic issues. You meet somebody coming the other way, or I go around the back of Banwell Hill, which is also a single lane, tiny little country lane. So the reason that there is no increase in Banwell means there is an increase in other totally unsuitable alternatives, either detours or runs. And that's why the discussion about a bypass in Banwell goes back for so many years, because the issue has been long-standing and hasn't been resolved. And this, okay, it may add 3 cars, I don't know how that's calculated, but I have to accept it, to that issue. But it will impact on all the other issues in that general area, which are caused by that knot in the middle of Banwell. My second worry is that, already voiced by the other 2 councillors as well, is that our current policy sets a maximum of 25 homes for such developments outside settlement boundaries. And I feel we owe it to Banwell, which has already agreed to quite a few developments and accepted them and taken them on board, and including the previous one, which was supported by me much against some of the local villagers, you know, we can't keep piling it on and more and more. I think we need to stay within that 25 house limit for Banwell. Thirdly, we're starting a journey of major consultations in our new local plan, and it may well be that there will be considerable changes to our existing policies. It's also very likely that there will be massive changes to the housing market due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's why we as a council are actually challenging those government figures. I'm not holding my breath that we'll get somewhere with it, but at least we're trying. So I feel although this application has clearly got some merits, it is premature in the current climate. And I'd like to ask that we stick to our 25 homes limit in locations such as this, even though I definitely recognise their merits in this. And if councillors are minded to approve this application, I would like to ask that at least in future we impose conditions that these developments are much more sustainable than they are at present, i.e. no gas boilers, but heat pumps, etc., electric car charging points, more renewable energy, etc. So thank you for letting me speak.
Okay. Hazel,
Chairman,
any more members?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. James McMore would like to respond in terms of the transport issue, first of all, followed by Councillor Crew, Councillor Gibbons, and then Councillor Solomon.
Okay. James.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, if I can come back to, I think it was Councillor Hogg on the question of the bypass. So yes, I did indeed say that our Highways and Transport response to the application doesn't consider the expected improvements associated with the bypass. So the traffic impact has been considered with expected growth in traffic and committed developments in the area, but not with the Banwell bypass. And then a comment from Councillor Havison about wrapped runs. So looking back at the Banwell cordon, it does incorporate the access points where those wrap runs would come in. So they are considered. But what we consider is that the traffic demand through Banwell is heavily suppressed, and there have been improvements to alternative routes such as the A370, which have meant that Banwell is a very unattractive route for people to take, which is why growth in traffic hasn't increased as much as expected, because, well, it's in fact reduced. And that's because it is self-limiting, because you can only get a certain amount through in a certain time. And whilst that's doesn't seem to be an acceptable situation, that's what the data shows.
Okay. Councillor Crew.
Thanks, Chairman. Well, this was a difficult one, but listen to the two local members why I went for agreeing with refusal. It is a problem with transport, because if you look at it, living where I do, right in the middle of this, I see the improvements which were made to the Junction 21 and to Somerset Avenue logically would have reduced the traffic flow through Banwell. So you can see why it would have gone down. It's probably down now because you don't want to wait half an hour. And on 3 different occasions, in midday, at 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. in the last 3 months, I've been 20 minutes getting through Banwell. If you look at it, Chairman, we can't discuss it with the bypass, as rightly said, because of course we passed the money for the bypass at council this week, but along with that comes another 7,500 houses. So therefore, that's not going to make any difference anyway. If you look at the situation now, we're now building Mead Fields. Now, a number of those people will make a decision that if they're queuing back because of the failure of Highway England to dual the entry road on 21, some of those will do the shortcut across through Banwell, so which will increase the traffic again. If you then look at the number of houses being built, we have a situation now, if you look at areas like Westwick, we have 2-bedroom houses with 3 cars. And that is because the kids are growing up, riding everywhere, cycling all around, lovely, until they get to 18. And they then get a car. So where we thought we'd have 1 or 2 cars at most, we're now finding 3 cars in 3-bedroom houses. And in fact, there are 2 houses around there that are 4-bed and 6 cars. So traffic is good. Whatever we might like to think, the bus services through Banwell are going down, not up. We need to do a comprehensive thing. If we can't improve the bus service, then it's fairly likely more traffic will keep coming through. And in support of the residents in that area, I think at this moment in time, I believe enough is enough. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gibbons.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Just really a comment, because obviously a lot of the points I might have wanted to raise have already been covered, as per usual. I suppose my concern with all these developments really is around
Any idea?
affordability. How many of these properties are really affordable for local people? Or is this just going to be another village development that is aimed at people currently residing outside North Somerset? Because what's needed in villages is properties that local people can afford to access.
Councillor Solomon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've been listening very carefully to the debate, especially after the last time, and I've listened to both ward councillors and the points they put forward. As you know, I did a site visit, and it really does prove that site visits are very useful. And having now looked at the site, I was quite surprised that it wasn't as big as I thought it was. And I know I'm doing a bit of a back turn, but when I looked at it, I felt it was more suited to 25 houses than it was 54. And although I've argued that the traffic situation has always been there in Banwell, and hopefully will get better when we get the bypass built, it will add to that traffic problem, but that's not my main objection. My objection be at this stage under CS32, in as much as that 25 houses I feel would be acceptable, but I feel developers now are in a situation where they get a little bit greedy, and they look at their profit line and they look at how many houses they can get away with on a site to improve their profit line, and I think that is the problem. So I may have changed my view on this one when it comes to voting. Thank you.
Thank you. Hazel, any more comments for our chats?
Chairman, Richard Kent would like to speak before Councillor Harley sums up.
Richard.
Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to make sure we were clear on what Councillor Harley's motion was. But before I do that, in terms of Councillor Crew's comments about car ownership, I think that there are local experiences of where we do have on-street parking issues because of high car ownership, but I don't think we can necessarily plan today's developments on the basis that that's how it's going to be forever and a day. The experience, even as we are now with changing working patterns, doesn't necessarily mean that in the future people will all be car owners and driving to work, because there will be other ways of doing work. But my particular point was just to be clear from Councillor Harley's motion, as I understand it from my notes, her reason for refusal is that the proposal is contrary to policies CS14 and CS32 of the development plan, in that it exceeds the number in CS32, and also has an adverse impact on effectively the local character and green setting of the village. I think she referred to it as strategic gap. It's not designated a strategic gap, but it's that green entry into the village, as I understand it. I hope that's clear for everybody, that is the motion or the reason for refusal, as I understand it to be.
Okay, before I invite Councillor Harley to sum up, are there any other comments from telephone members? No, in which case, Councillor Harley, can you sum up, please?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. I thank all the comments, and have listened to them carefully, from all the councillors, and I thank them for their comments. I think, in actual fact, basically, a lot of them have supported my concerns, and certainly my fellow ward councillor, and I just want to say she's absolutely right about, and that's the concern of getting the actual correct traffic numbers. She's absolutely right where people actually bypass it. I've done it myself. I've got onto the outskirts of entrance to Banwell, seen the queue, backtracked, and gone around the back roads because I know them. And I just want to also comment on, I think it was Councillor Payne, who said that, we need to have these properties as part of a community. There's shops and something. There's nothing in Banwell, actually. One shop, main shop, and then two little ones, which are just not open most of the time. And I think that, for a community like that, it's not going to be involved with Banwell. It's going to be a community on a hill, a part of. And at the end of the day, they're going to be out commuting to go shopping. Now, we have to make a stand. We really do. I'm sorry to have to say. So I am really, really asking you to support that. We always accept a fair share of development, but I'm asking you to support me on refusal in this instance because we have not a good public transport system suitable for the amount of people that live around this area, and we also are struggling to cope with what we've got. So it's certainly the policies that Richard Kent read out, I would go with that, and I hope my fellow councillors are going to support me. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we have a proposal to refuse the application. Sue, can you please conduct the vote by roll call, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Taking the vote in alphabetical order, and on each occasion the councillor will be confirming that they have heard the whole of the debate unless they state otherwise. The motion is for refusal for the reasons given by Councillor Harley. When you say for, it will be for refusal, against will be against refusal, and abstention. Councillor Cherry.
Against.
Councillor Cole.
Abstain.
Councillor Crew.
For.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
Against.
Councillor Gibbons.
Abstain.
Councillor Harley.
For.
Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Against.
Councillor McQuillan.
For.
Councillor Payne.
Against.
Councillor Porter.
For.
Councillor Solomon.
For.
Councillor Westwood.
Against.
Chairman, that's 6 for the proposal, 5 against and 2 abstentions.
So refusal has been carried.
Chairman, if I may, this was a section 1 item. So for those people, members of the public that may be watching, under the council's procedures, a motion that's carried contrary to the officer recommendation for an application of this nature is held over to the next meeting for the decision to be ratified. So the application will come back to the next meeting for that decision to be ratified. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, moving on to item 7. Application 17/P/1250/FUH, 171 dwellings at Engine Lane, Nailsea. As a Nailsea member, I have no particular issues with this report. I've also spoken to the ward member, James Tonkin, who was very supportive of the application. Before I go any further, can I bring in Roger? Roger Wilmot.
Thank you, Chairman.
I think I should have done that first of all. Never mind.
Thank you, Chairman. Right, if I run firstly through the slides, then I'll just briefly cover the salient points of the update sheet as well. So, starting off, the site here is the outlined in red, and Engine Lane itself runs sort of from the top of the page to the bottom of the page in a diagonal fashion along the right hand side of that red lined area of the application site. So off to the north, the larger footprints of the buildings there are the Blackfriars Trading Estate, and then further to the bottom of the page there are residential roads at Allington Gardens, the Bramleys and Worcester Gardens. Thank you. just seeing that in an aerial view, perhaps a little bit clearer than it was off the site location plan. You can see at the top of the page, or at the top of the photograph, about a third of the way from the left is Banwell Rugby Club. Down to the immediate left of Engine Lane, that is the area of the proposed replacement playing pitches, and the main core of the residential development is in the wider part of the red outlined area in the centre of the photograph. There are junctions down at the bottom of the road with Netherton Lane, and at the top with North Street. Thank you.
Thank you.
This isn't in the same orientation as the last two plans because it was necessary to rotate it by 90 degrees, but in essence this captures really one of the reasons why this application has taken some considerable period of time since this was originally resolved to be approved at committee in December 2017. So there has been a development consent order approved by the inspectorate, and that development consent order is for the Hinkley Point to Avonmouth cable line, which is going to be undergrounded, affecting part of this site. So the area that's covered by the development consent order is outlined. It's a little bit faint, but you'll see running from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, and then to the right is the boundary of the development consent order itself. Within that development consent order, which is effectively the area over which National Grid have or enjoy various powers, there is a specific easement, which is the area covered with purple boundary markings here, and then a cross hatching within those, and that is the area within which the fairly large cabling is to be situated. So work has already commenced on that, I think with the construction of hallways and so on, and National Grid will be on site for some while undertaking these fairly substantial engineering works. Thank you. So just a quick indication of the context of the site. This is from the bottom end or the southern end of Engine Lane, with a broad view over the site, the fields in front of you, the view. You'll see the area where much of the open space for the development will lie, which is around the area where the furthest belt of trees is shown. Engine Lane from here is obviously progressing in a northwards direction, and we'll see on the next slide the relationship of that to existing housing. Thank you. You'll get, I think, an idea from here that the existing character of housing have fairly generous gardens, including the front gardens along Engine Lane, and that effectively will be replicated, albeit not in private garden areas, but in public open space that will be formed over the National Grid easement. So there will be a fairly green context still remaining along Engine Lane. I think it also indicates that the properties, existing properties on the right-hand side here, are set slightly above the site, and that from that particular perspective, that combined, I think, with the distances between that and the new housing development, ensure really that there is little significant impact on the living conditions of existing neighbours in the area. The first junction you can see there is one of three along Engine Lane. Thank you. Again, I won't dwell for very long on this, but again, shows that characteristic of quite large garden areas continues further along Engine Lane. You'll see the hedge that's borders Engine Lane, borders the site. The open space effectively and the National Grid easement are the other side of that hedge line. Thank you. And one further view along there again showing the hedge line which continues further along. There's one further slide beyond this one which reverses the view, looks back at the site from the north down towards the south of Engine Lane, and again I think you can broadly see the area of the replacement playing pitches and the where the housing development will be. And I think we then move on to the layout plans. These are in two sections because again I'm afraid I couldn't get these on a single plan, but you'll see from the top middle of the plan down pretty much to the centre of the plan there are 5 replacement playing pitches which will be controlled by condition that those are available before the dwellings are brought into occupation. And you'll see the start or the top of the housing development in the bottom end of the plan. Slightly to the left of that, you'll see projecting towards the top of the page is the attenuation pond and part of the open space and drainage requirements being met. Going further south in terms of the layout, this shows the core of the development being covered up space, so this will be very much the focal point of the development, and that is there particularly to meet the requirements of ecological mitigation and protection for the bat flight corridors which pass through this site. To the right hand side of the site you'll see again the open space which is over the top of the National Grid easement, and through that is shown the 2-metre hogging path that's referred to in the report, which also sweeps round to the bottom end of the site as well. Thank you. And I think finally, again, I won't dwell on this in huge detail, but just as to illustrate that the top line shows the effectively the street scene from Engine Lane. The middle plan shows that there are slightly larger scale dwellings to create some variety, and those are concentrated around the central open space. And then to the bottom illustration is what is described as the sort of core part of the housing. So those are generally perhaps slightly smaller dwellings and are contained on a series of cul-de-sacs amongst the hierarchy of roads within the site. If I can then just move quickly on, just draw your attention to some particular points within the update sheet. There's one point I should clarify which isn't on the update sheet either, and that is that I've noted that in the planning policy framework there's a reference to policies SA5 and SA6 of the site allocations plan, which were listed as relevant policies about local green space and undesignated green space. That's actually incorrect. The site is not a local green space, albeit the submissions to the site allocations plan were made to that effect. Policy SA6 isn't relevant because the site is allocated for residential use, and that particular policy is worded only to cover green spaces within settlement boundaries, which this one is not, albeit that it is actually allocated. SA6 applies, as I say, to undesignated green space within settlements. In terms of the additional information from the applicant, we've now received confirmation of the National Grid boundaries, which I've sought to explain. We've also had an indication that National Grid won't permit a tarmac path where the hogging path is shown, but we are proposing some ability effectively to revisit that if we're able to negotiate that at some future point. But it does at least establish what is required in the site allocations plan, which is a footpath along the eastern edge of the site adjacent to Engine Lane. There are some further matters that we'll need to discuss if the resolution is to approve the application again. There are one or two matters that we will need to revisit, including some of the detail, and we're seeking your authorisation to resolve and discuss those matters and agree them with the chairman, vice chairman and local members if you're favourably inclined to the recommendation. In terms of the amended plans, those cover a lot of technical details relating to particularly to highway matters such as road dimension, tracking diagrams for things like refuse vehicles, fire appliances, surfacing, drop curves, and some minor amendments to the lighting, plus the additional drainage details which the applicant has submitted with the objective of trying to obviate the need for drainage conditions on this, which we referred to in the report. So finally, just refer to the fact there are some additional third-party objections which don't raise any new issues, and a couple of suggested amendments to the wording of conditions. So condition 8 might require some amendment to enable us to, as another party, to enter an agreement with National Grid to see if we can get the cycleway. And there's a reference also to an additional condition just to comply again with the site allocations plan that relates to coal mining investigations and some further tweaks to the recommendation, but those don't have any substantive effect to the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. The original application, which was fully debated for 184 dwellings, was that back in 2018 or 17? 2018.
2017.
17.
It was December
okay.
2017.
Right, okay. Well, just to backtrack, as I said, I've got no particular issues with the report, and the ward councillor, James Tonkin, is very supportive of approval. I think Roger's just given the backstory, so I'm happy to move officer's report. So I invite a seconder.
I should be happy to
second
second that, Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Hazel, anybody waiting?
There is no one waiting to speak. No, I think Richard Kent may have wanted to say something in response to a question on chat from Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
Chairman, thank you. Yes, it's just about there was a query as to why this had come to committee, and the only point I was going to make is what the point you've just made, that this application was previously resolved for approval by the previous committee. Permission's not actually formally been issued and the Section 106 agreement signed because further negotiations have been taking place to deal with the National Grid issue. That's now much further advanced. So we brought it back to committee because the committee had dealt with it previously, and as you say, it's a fewer houses, and we think everything else is acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. I've nothing else to add, so we have a proposal to approve the application. Sue, can you please conduct the vote of the roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. For each vote taken, the councillor will be confirming that they have heard the whole of the debate unless they state otherwise. The motion is to move the officers' reports, which is a recommendation for approval. So therefore, when you say for, it will be for approval, and against will be against approval. Councillor Cherry.
Approved. 4.
Councillor Cole.
4.
Councillor Crew.
4.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
4.
Councillor Gibbons.
4.
Councillor Harley.
4.
Councillor Hogg.
4.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
4.
Councillor McGuillan has left the meeting. He had to go. Gave his apologies to you, Chairman. Councillor Payne.
4.
Councillor Porter.
4.
Councillor Solomon.
4.
And Councillor Westwood.
4.
So that's Councillor, Chairman, that's a majority for approval.
That's clearly
unanimous. Sorry, unanimous.
Thank you. Right, moving on to item 9, application 20/P/0926/TEA, 20 metre phase 8 monopole at the junction of Huntingdon Road and Summerlands Road, Weston-super-Mare. Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. This shows the proposal of where the new mast is sited. If we just go down, it's a crossroads and an area verge. If we can just go down to the next slide, please. That's showing the mast that's and the height of it, and the trees are the comparison in the region of 7 metres in height. So the mast is substantially higher than the trees that adjoin the site. And any houses of a similar height, which the houses are about 7 metres. If we can just go down to the next slide, please. The proposed mast will be on the corner on the green grass in front of the trees. There's a house behind the trees. So it will be clearly at the end of that stretch of open space. Next slide, please. Next slide. The cabinets will be on the verge on the right-hand side of the trees. And next slide, please. Again, that's a view of the corner. Next slide, please. The cabinets will just be on the left-hand side on the grass verge behind the trees. Next slide, please. And the mast and cabinets would be right in the middle of the photograph. As you can see where the road crosses, the houses are about 7 metres in height, and the mast will be substantially higher than those. Our concern is that the mast is out of keeping because of its height in the area. The cabinets on the verge in a very prominent position. And we're not satisfied that the applicants have done enough to justify that they've looked at other alternatives and putting them on high buildings or using other masts in the area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gibbons.
Yes, sorry, just getting myself unmuted and visible. Yes, thank you. I called this in when we first got wind of this, when it was one of these pre-application things that we've all had in our wards from time to time, which can be, we feared, nodded through because they're like electricity substations or whatever, and they don't need planning permission. But as you can see from those slides, this is a particularly pleasant area for the centre of Weston. And the idea that something like this could just be plonked down on a piece of green space, which is described as a verge, but it is a continuous part of an open green space that we fought very hard for some years ago, and which the council agreed was appropriate to remain as an open space. We actually refused planning permission for a play area there. So, and at the time we all accepted that an open green space for the town is a huge asset. We've been talking here about protecting views, protecting local environments, and this is a key example of a local environment in Weston-super-Mare that needs to be protected. I'm absolutely delighted and grateful to the officers for all their work on this and enduring many, many emails and phone calls from me and my ward councillor colleague, Councillor Tucker, on this. And I'm in the fortunate position of moving that we accept the officer's recommendations and agree that prior approval is required and that we refuse it. I think that many of the residents were actually really afraid that this kind of development could just go through. They felt that their voices weren't going to be heard because of the lockdown. There was no opportunity for proper consultation or any open meetings or even a protest because people couldn't get out and about. And the strong feeling that the developers they sent very few letters of notification, let's say, to residents. I'm sure they were within the letter of the law, but you've seen the size and the scale of this thing. To send letters around to less than 12 houses warning them of it is hardly kind of adequate local consultation in residents' views. So from day one, Richard and I were very much in support of the residents' fears and concerns. As I say, we've got a great report here. I don't think I need to take you through all the elements of it because I'm moving that we accept the officer's recommendation to refuse. I don't think you need me to read through the reasons. They're all there in the report, and we've had a long meeting already, so I won't go into detail. You've all read this, and I hope you'll agree with me.
Okay. So do we have a seconder?
Yeah,
I'll second it, Chairman.
Join the queue.
Can I speak, Chairman, as I've just seconded it?
Yes, Richard.
This took me back 27 years to when I was a district councillor on Leominster District Council, and in my ward, a phone mast appeared pretty much overnight, and there was virtually no consultation. I, as the local member, didn't know anything about it, and we ended up going to the Ombudsman. There was an Ombudsman's inquiry into it, because even at that time, the regulations for the introduction of phone masts were extremely weak, shall we say. So I've got pleasure in seconding this one.
Thank you. Hazel.
Yes, Councillor Crockford-Hawley, followed by Councillor Crew, who have asked to speak.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
Thank you, Chairman. One purely administrative point. We have one colleague who is not muting, and the noise that's coming through is really irritating. I don't know who it is, but somebody is causing a great deal of interference. On the subject, Chairman, why are we even discussing this? It's a Section 2 item. The officer's recommendation is for a refusal. Why is it even on the agenda? We don't normally refer anything to committee if we are going to approve an officer's recommendation on a Section 2 item.
I totally agree.
If we're all going to go back to the old days of referring things because we all want to have a few words about it,
yes,
on and on, this should not even be up for discussion.
Councillor Crew.
Chairman, I was about to say the same thing, but it doesn't occur to me that just a mile and a half away, we are just increasing the size of the mast on New Bristol Road. Why they would need another one there is beyond me.
Hazel, do we have any more comments on the chats?
No further comments, no.
Simon, do you want to say anything else?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, apologise to members. We did bring it forward with the recommendation because we thought the applicants may submit further information on the justification for the mast, but they haven't done so. We were concerned. Their argument is that it is in the middle of the cell that is needed to serve it with 5G masts, the cell areas are much smaller. I'm aware that we've approved higher masts along New Bristol Road. We've approved a new one out at the hospital, but we're not satisfied. The applicants in this case have really considered other high buildings or other more appropriate locations. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gibbons, do you wish to sum up?
Well, just to reiterate what I said before and to make a comment to Councillor Crockford-Hawley that indeed this was referred as a precaution. I was hoping that we could just reject it because the developers didn't respond to the request for additional information, therefore it would have been refused anyway. But there was a feeling that there was a very tight timescale and we hadn't heard anything by, I think, was it Thursday last week, and the cut-off date was the 5th. So it was referred to this committee. I appreciate you might feel it's a waste of time, but I sincerely hope that you will support me and agree with the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Okay, we have a proposal to refuse the application. Sue, can you please conduct the vote by roll call, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Each councillor will be confirming that they have heard the whole of the debate unless they state otherwise. The motion is to take the officer's recommendation to refuse. When you say for, it will be for refusal. Against will be against refusal. Councillor Cherry.
For.
Pardon, Councillor Cherry, could you say that again?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Crew.
For.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
For.
Councillor Gibbons.
For.
Councillor Harley.
For.
Councillor Hogg.
For.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
For.
Councillor McQuillan's left. Councillor Payne.
For.
Councillor Porter.
For.
Councillor Solomon.
For.
And Councillor Westwood.
For.
It's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 10, application 20/P/0322/FUH, ground floor front extension with balcony, raised roof and convert 2 bedrooms with balcony, side garden store with extension, dormer windows, 73 Pembroke Road, Portishead. Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just run through the slides for members. The properties, you can see the red line around the application site in the centre of the plan. What is also noticeable is that there are detached properties to the left-hand side, and immediately to the right-hand side there is an access that goes to a rear parcel of land that's at the end of the back garden. There are properties, there are flats to the top right, just in front of the property, and then residential properties on the right-hand side in a cul-de-sac at the top, which is Redcliffe Close, and at the bottom there are properties whose back gardens back onto the what will be the end of the garden on Northfield Road. Next slide, please. We've produced this plan to show members the distances from the back of number 71 to the nearest adjoining properties at the rear which would be affected. You can see the closest one is 26.66 metres. The next closest is at 36.29 metres. Then the two which are much further away in Northfield Road are 49 and 59, well, nearly 60 metres. The other one is there's a distance of 28 metres, which is to the boundary of the property that whose garden goes down towards the rear from Northfield Road. we look at the block plan, that highlights that on the front of the property there's a proposed balcony that will go across the front of the property with a front extension underneath it and one dormer window in the roof. And then on the rear elevation there are 3 dormer windows, 2 of which are doorways, and a balcony. If we can have the next slide, please. Again, that's an aerial view giving you some idea of the garden areas and the distances to the adjoining properties from the rear. Next slide, please. That's the existing elevations of the property. If we go to the next slide, and this is the proposals. If you look at the top left plan of the elevation, you can see the balcony on the front elevation and the dormer window. If you look at the middle plan on the top row, that's the 3 dormers on the roof with the balcony. If you can you just move the slide up slightly, please? If you look at the bottom left floor plan, that shows the extension that will be built at ground floor level, and then the balcony on the front would project forward over the entrance to the garages and the ground floor extension. And then the middle drawing shows the extent of the balcony that will be over the new ground floor extension. And then the drawing on the, hold on a second, and the drawing on the right hand side bottom corner is the proposed roof extensions, and that shows the rear balcony that will go out from the dormer windows. If we can go to the next slide. The number 71 is the property on the left hand side. The property on the right of the photograph is the one that's got grey cladding around it. That has had a front extension with a balcony above that front extension, although it didn't come forward of the front of the building. Can we have the next photo, please? This is a view up the road that shows that the house is set back from the road. The block of flats is on the left-hand side, and the number 71 is in the middle. Thank you, Chairman. As I said, I think the issue with this application is the issue of overlooking and the distances to the adjoining properties, particularly from the rear balcony area. We're proposing saying it's acceptable in terms of the council's residential design guide, but we would want screens provided at either end of that balcony to reduce sideways overlooking. Thank you, Chairman.
Andy, I think you're muted.
So I am.
Yeah.
Who did that?
Don't know.
So via chats, can I have a proposal from a member, please? Hazel.
Nothing received just yet, Chairman. Just waiting.
Any comments at all from members?
Nothing received, no.
So, Chairman, we have no comments from anyone who wishes to speak against the officer.
Yeah.
Am I right in making that assumption?
Correct, yeah.
In which case, may I ask why this is on the agenda?
Yeah.
This is a complete waste of our time.
Because a local member insisted.
Who is not speaking to it? Where is Councillor Holland?
Well, exactly. Yeah.
I'm
Chairman, I
sorry,
think
it's a complete waste of our time.
Yeah.
I agree. So, hey.
Yes, Chairman.
Oh.
So Councillor Payne has proposed the officer's recommendation.
And I will second that. Okay.
But I don't wish to speak to it.
Who's that? Is that Councillor Payne?
Yeah, yes, me. I'm just proposing it in order so that we can move forward.
Good. Right. So,
Chairman, can I? Oh.
Anne, yeah.
Yes, sorry, Chairman, can I just ask, in support of what Councillor Crawford-Hawley has said, can we actually make sure that people understand when they bring forward these applications that they are going to be there to speak to it?
Yeah, I agree.
Both for the officer's sake and for our sakes as well.
Yeah.
Chairman, Richard Kent has asked to speak.
Richard.
Chairman, yes, just on that point, it's a very good point, well made, and you may recall at the last meeting, as part of our emergency delegation arrangements, the committee did resolve to ask that members do use their call-in powers sparingly, and to try and save committee time, and particularly given some of the technical challenges that we have with running virtual committees.
Yeah.
So I know that Simon and the case officers do talk very closely with individual councillors to try and understand their particular issues and try to avoid bringing things to committee wherever possible. And for some reason, it wasn't possible with either this case or the previous case to persuade the members that committee decision wasn't needed. But I would agree, it is a straightforward application. It does comply with our policies, and I'm all for moving on.
Yeah. And Chairman, can I just make one observation? We ought to also understand that sometimes applications come in, that have been referred, and they could be months away from when the councillor asks for it to come forward. Sometimes it might be three things away. And in one case, I know that we'd had an election and the person wasn't re-elected, so it was still on, obviously had to come forward. But this is a case whereby obviously officers have gone in to try to persuade it. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen. Probably they don't understand it. Maybe they do. I don't know.
Clearly, some members aren't listening.
Over a year.
Okay, so we have a proposal.
Chairman, I beg your pardon. Councillor Hogg has asked to speak.
Just very briefly, I just wonder whether an aid memoir, can we feed it back to the ward member, please? And maybe an aid memoir just to sort of outline why members want to be online for longer than 3 hours, if we can help out.
Yeah.
So we have a proposal to approve the application. Sue, can you please conduct the vote by roll call, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Proposal is to move officer's recommendation, which is for approval. Please, it will be taken that the council will be confirming that they've heard the whole of the debate, although it was very brief. And when you are saying for, it will be for approval. Against will be against approval. Councillor Cherry.
For.
Councillor Cole.
For.
Councillor Crew.
For.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
For.
Councillor Gibbons.
For.
Councillor Harley.
For.
Councillor Hogg.
Oh, let me see. For.
Councillor Leigh Morgan.
Against.
What?
Councillor McMillan has left. Councillor Payne.
Abstain.
Councillor Porter.
For.
Councillor Solomon.
For.
And Councillor Westwood.
For.
Chairman, that's 10 for approval, 1 against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Moving on to applications 20/P/0348/FUH. Proposed remodelling of existing dwelling to include minor extensions to current form at Westacre, Belton Road, Portishead. Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can talk members through the slides. The first thing is that the area of land that's coloured blue is or was part of the garden area of this property, so owned by the applicant. But in that area, we refused planning permission to build a new house. One of the grounds, well, there were two grounds that we refused it. One was that it was out of keeping with the character of the area, and the second was that it would have an adverse impact on the outlook of neighbours. That was allowed on appeal by an inspector. So the inspector considered the impact on adjoining properties through overlooking. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is the existing property, which shows the extent of the building, the access and parking area. Next slide, please. That's the existing front elevation of the property. Next slide, please. Front onto Belton Road. That's the rear elevation that faces towards the rear garden properties that back onto Nichols Road. Next slide, please. That's the north elevation that faces down the hill out towards the Severn Estuary. Next slide, please. And that's the north elevation. Members could see that the site has quite a gradient on it. The proposed plans are coming up next. This is a proposed ground floor layout plan showing how they're going to change the property, mainly with a range of extensions and alterations to most of the elevations. The bigger part one is the one that's on the bottom left-hand side, which is at the rear of the property. Next slide, please. That's a lower ground floor area. Next slide, please. That's the east elevation, which is the one that fronts onto Belton Road, and that's how it's going to be remodelled. As you can see on the bottom plans, the difference in the levels. There's a greyed out building, which would be the proposal that was allowed on appeal. Next slide, please. This is on the west elevation that fronts onto the back of properties in Nichols Road. And again, there's a cross section showing the different heights. Next slide, please. And that's the elevation that faces north, and that's towards the estuary. Next slide, please. And that's the north elevation that faces an adjoining property that's higher up the slope. Next slide, please. I'm afraid that that's not very clear. It's a small plan, but the area edged red is the site of the house that was allowed on appeal by an inspector, and all the distances that you can just about make out in blue and red are distances from windows to adjoining properties. So having measured all the distances for windows to windows, the only ones that don't fall within the residential design guidelines are the distances between the existing house and the extensions they want to alter and the proposed house that was allowed on appeal to the north of the site, which is what we put on to show that we already have lost an appeal for building a new house in the garden area on the grounds an inspector didn't accept that the distances were unacceptable, and we consider that in this case the distances from the remodelled property with the extensions is acceptable. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Again, the local member has not attended this meeting. Are there any comments via chat?
Yes, Councillor Crockford-Hawley is asked to speak.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
Chairman, what is the problem with Porter's Head?
Good question.
We have two applications referred to us by Porter's Head members, neither of whom have had the courtesy to turn up to this meeting. It is a complete waste of time. Might I ask the clerk to send a memo to every member of the council asking them to desist from this nonsensical behaviour? They are wasting officers' time, they're wasting our time, and worse still, how much time have officers spent preparing agenda papers for these two items? A complete and utter waste of time.
And can I just add that I think both members represent the same ward.
Yes, they do.
Which is crazy.
Here, I agree.
I propose we move to the vote. I propose we accept the officer's recommendation.
Seconded.
Second. Right. Hazel, can I just check there's no other comments?
Rather than roll call.
No other further comments, no, Chairman.
So I'll move to the vote. We have a proposal to approve the application. Sue, can you please conduct the vote by roll call?
Thank you, Chairman. Proposal to approve. Councillor Cherry.
4.
Councillor Cole.
4.
Councillor Crew.
4.
Councillor Crockford-Hawley.
4.
Councillor Gibbons.
4.
Councillor Harley.
4.
Councillor Hogg.
4.
Councillor Lane Morgan.
4.
Councillor McQuillan has left. Councillor Payne.
4.
Councillor Porter.
4.
Councillor Solomon.
4.
And Councillor Westwood.
4.
It's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, item 12, planning appeals. Richard.
Nothing to add, Chairman.
Are there any comments from members?
None. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Right. Item 13. There is no
Gin and tonic time.
And that concludes the meeting. Thank you all very much.
Let's rush for the bar.
Please hang up promptly.
Well done. Cheers, everyone.
Okay. Cheers,
Thank
bye.
you very much.